We gather this hour to pause, to honour the Spirit, and to accept ourselves as fragile humans, equally full of nobility and strength. We gather perhaps weary of life's many trials, yet still cheered by infinite possibilities for love's grace. We meet with smiles and glad voices for friends old and new. Every stranger a gift of potential friendship and mutual consolation. We rejoice in the keen mind and the warm heart. We remember those whose opportunities and needs our society thwarts. And yet we give thanks for all the blessings that are still ours, even in the midst of struggle. We praise all who extend their hand in service and whose vision of justice commands action. We pause and we gather. We meet and rejoice. We remember and give thanks. We praise and we proclaim our community as we gather this morning once again to worship together. Well, these words from Bruce Southworth welcome all those who have gathered this morning for our Sunday service. Welcome to those of you who are here in person at Essex Church. Welcome to all who are joining via Zoom from far and wide, or indeed tuning in at a later date. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jane Blackall and I'm Minister with Kensington Unitarians. This morning's service is titled "This Too Shall Pass," a title that's borrowed from the well-known teaching story which we'll be hearing later on. It's a story which contains some deep wisdom about how we might face life's many ups and downs with some sort of equanimity. I chose this theme because I'm really aware how many of us are going through difficult stuff at the moment. I guess there's never going to be a time when all of us are feeling hunky-dory, but we really do seem to have a lot of tough stuff going on for people in our community right now. So I wanted us to take some time to pool our collective wisdom about how we manage to stay afloat during such challenging times, how we might find the strength and the hope to go on. And so later in the service, we're going to hear some hopeful and encouraging stories from Alex, from Pat and from David about tough times that they've been through and how they came out the other side. But before we go any further, we're going to do what we always do and light our chalice flame. It's a moment for us to stop and gather ourselves, to take a breath or two and let go of anything we don't need to be carrying for the next hour. And it's also a ritual that connects us with Unitarians and Unitarian universities the world over. And it reminds us of the proudly progressive religious tradition of which this gathering is part. We light this chalice as a reminder of the tradition that holds us and the values and aspirations that we share as a community. Our commitment to the common good and our yearning for a better world that is yet to be, where all may know true freedom, justice, equality and peace. May this small flame be for us a sign of faith and hope and love. Time to sing. Our first hymn this morning is number 191 in the Green Book, To Worship Rightly, a good classic tune. For those joining via Zoom, the words will be up on your screen, as they will for all the hymns today. Feel free to stand or sit as you prefer, and let us sing up as best we can, hymn 191. So let's take all of our joys and concerns, both spoken and unspoken, into an extended time of prayer now with some words by Lynn Cox. You might want to adjust your position to get more comfortable. Perhaps there's a position that feels more prayerful, in which you feel more grounded and centred. Whatever helps you to get into the right state of body and mind for us to pray together now, to be fully present in this sacred time and space with each other, with ourselves, and with that which lies within us and beyond us. Spirit of life, God of all love, in whom we live and move and have our being, we turn our full attention to you, the light within and without, as we tune into the depths of this life and the greater wisdom to which and through which we are all intimately connected. Be with us now as we allow ourselves to drop into the silence and the stillness at the very centre of our being. This morning we give thanks for the gift of renewal, for the ability to begin again and start over after each time of trial and loss, each season of struggle and sorrow, in the midst of upheaval and endless tests of our endurance. Grant us the courage to continue on the journey, the courage to act and to speak for the well-being of others and ourselves and of this planet that we share. May we forgive ourselves and each other when our courage and care falls short, and may we resolve to try again. Grant us hearts to love boldly, to embody our faith and our values in living words and deeds. May our hearts open to embrace humility, grace, and reconciliation. Grant us the ability to learn and grow, to let the Spirit of love and truth work its transformation upon us and within us. Grant us the spirit of radical hospitality, the willingness to sustain a dwelling place for the holy that resides in all being. And grant us a sense of being at peace in the world, even as we are in perpetual motion, tossed and turned by life's tempests. Let us cultivate together the strength to welcome everything that life brings our way, and all manner of ways to be on the journey together. We know that in our company this morning and every time we gather, there will be those among our number who are suffering in body, mind, and spirit. And we know too well that there is much struggle, hardship, and injustice the world over. So let's spend a few quiet moments directing our prayers of loving kindness for all those who suffer this day. in our company this morning and every time we gather, there will be those among us whose hearts are full and overflowing, uplifted by family and friends, inspired by nature and culture, engaged in meaningful work. So let us spend a few more moments directing our prayers of gratitude for all that is good in our lives. In our company this morning and every time we gather, there will be those among us who are just getting by as best they can, stumbling through life's endless ups and downs and seeking to discern the next step forward. So let's spend a few more moments asking for what we most need to face all that life brings our way. Spirit of life, God of all love, as this time of prayer draws to a close, we offer up our joys and our concerns, our hopes and our fears, our beauty and our brokenness, and we call on you for insight, healing and renewal. As we look forward now to the coming week, help us to live well each day and be our best selves, using our unique gifts in the service of love, justice and peace. Amen. Time to sing again now. This one's an old favourite of mine, hymn number 33 in your green books, Do You Hear? I think I will ask you to play this one through, George, because we haven't done it for a while. Hymn number 33. So the title of this morning's service comes from a teaching story that made a big impression on me when I first heard it in this very church, told by the then minister Art Lester about 25 years ago. Such stories are very sticky, I find. They seem pretty simple, but they contain these nuggets of wisdom which get under our skin. They stick with us in a way that perhaps makes the wisdom a little bit more accessible to us when times are tough, when we need to hear it again. This particular story turns up in various guises, as such stories often do. There's a Jewish version going around that links it to King Solomon. The version I'm going to share today is from a Sufi origin. I think it's Persian originally. A young dervish who had travelled long and hard through the desert finally came to the outskirts of a village where he'd hoped to find a place to rest. The dervish politely asked the villager where he might find food and lodgings for the night. "Well," said the man, scratching his head somewhat, "we don't really have such a place here, but I'm sure the old man, Shakir, would be happy to provide for you tonight." And the man gave some directions to this old man's cattle ranch. As it turns out, Shakir was a very hospitable person, very kind. He insisted that the dervish stay in his house for a few days and gave him plenty of food and water for his onward journey. On his way back to the desert, though, the dervish couldn't help puzzling over the last little exchange he had with Shakir as he left. The dervish had said, "Thank God for your good fortune, that you are so well off that you can share it with me." But Shakir just replied, "Don't be fooled by appearances, this too shall pass." During his years on the Sufi path, the dervish had come to understand that anything he heard or saw along the way was a lesson to be learned and something worth contemplating more deeply. That was the very reason he'd set out on his journey in the first place, to learn something. So he passed 5 more years of travelling from land to land and learning from his experiences along the way. And one day he found himself returning to that same village where he'd stopped a few years before. He remembered the kindness of Shakir and he asked after him. The villager said, he lives in the next village now, 10 miles away. He works for Haddad. So the dervish rushed on to the next village, to Haddad's splendid home, where he was greeted by Shakir, who looked much, much older now. He was living a hard life of poverty, dressed in rags, and he lived in a single room. The dervish asked, "What happened to you then?" And Shakir told him a flood had wiped out his ranch, taken away his cattle. Him and his family had become servants out of necessity. They were in a tough place. But still, Shakir was kind and friendly, took the dervish into his one single room and looked after him just as he had before. As the dervish left, he said, "I'm so sorry for what's happened to you and your family." But Shakir smiled and said, "Remember, this too shall pass." The dervish went on to India. And many years later, he came back home to Persia. He looked forward to visiting his old friend Shakir one more time. But when he arrived at the village, he couldn't find him. Instead, he found a modest grave with the inscription, "This too shall pass." He wept and he was filled with sadness. He was never going to be able to see Shakir again. And he was puzzled still by the inscription. He thought, well, riches come and go. But this is a tomb, that's pretty final. How can a tomb change? He made a point of coming back to visit the gravesite every year to pay his respects to his friend. But after some years, as the dervish was getting on a bit himself, he returned to find that the cemetery and the grave were gone, washed away by a flood. He was heartbroken that the last trace of his friend was swept away. But he suddenly had an epiphany. He lifted his eyes to the heavens and said, as if he was discovering what it really meant for the first time, "This too shall pass." When the dervish was finally too old to travel, he decided to settle down in that very same village where he'd first met Shakir, and people came from all over the place to have the benefit of his wisdom. Eventually his fame spread to the king's top advisor, who happened to be looking for someone who was especially wise. The king had said he desired for a ring to be made, and the ring had to have a very special property. It was to carry an inscription such that if the king was sad, the words would make him happy, and if he was happy, the words would make him sad. And many people came forward with suggestions, but the king didn't fancy any of them. So the advisor finally came to the dervish for help, and a few days later a ring, an emerald ring, was made and presented to the king. The king had been quite depressed for some time, but he reluctantly put the ring on his finger. And then he read the short inscription carved into the band of the ring. He contemplated for a moment, He started to smile, and in a moment he started to laugh. And of course, on the ring were inscribed those words, "This too shall pass." Some words of wisdom from the Sufi tradition.
I've suffered from depression for much of my life. It began in my early teens and it's waxed and waned ever since. There have been grace periods, and some of them have even been of fairly long duration. But there's also been times of suicidal thoughts and periods of great despair. I've tried everything to deal with it, really everything: exercise, meds, food supplements, meditation, rest, changing my life direction, carrying on living to avoid wounding others. All of this has helped some of the time, and some of it has helped a lot, and a lot of the time, but none of it has been the solution with a capital S. In my experience, meditation helps, and medication too, perhaps medication more, and there have been times I've got through only thanks to my good friends in pill form. But those friends can only do so much for you, and every time you change your medication or you titrate up or down, they have side effects that can be extremely unpleasant. I'm still on medication, but I think it's coming to the end of its usefulness, and I'm hoping to come off it later this year. It's been great scaffolding, but it hasn't been a cure. So here's what I've found to be the most helpful path through the mire: hanging on until things shift, and therapy. I learned endurance early on in my life, and although that wasn't entirely healthy, it's been an asset in terms of fighting off thoughts of death and keeping on through the long soul winters of my life. There's often been a good reason for my depression, located in the world around me. And yes, in the words of the cliche, when life gives you lemons, you can make lemonade. But I ended up making so much it gave me diabetes. Life can be a series of wounding blows, and to be honest, it's only when that began to change that my mental health had the space to begin to improve. Therapy has helped because it's shown me who I am, why I am this way, and how to deal with life in a way that's more conscious and less instinctive response. Alongside learning I'm autistic, which I did at the age of 48, this has been a real saga of discovery. It's helped me address traumas and shift the balance in my psyche so that I'm in a more robust condition. I understand both myself and the world in general much better, and that, of course, has been very, very useful. But there's a note of caution I have to sound here. This understanding has taken years of work, and finding the right therapists took time. I think you can get something from many forms of counselling, even the 6 sessions of CBT that the NHS can offer. But I found it's the excavation that you do in psychodynamic therapy that really helps. A therapist once asked me if, when I couldn't find hope, could I find curiosity? Could I carry on going just a bit longer, just to see if things turned out as badly as I feared and expected? Now, that was a genius move on her part, because at that point, I'd learned in my life that it very rarely goes as I expected. It can go worse, often it does, and it can go better, but it's very rarely delivered what I thought likely. Curiosity. And on that insight, I have hung my recovery.
Thanks, Alex. So we're going to move into a time of meditation now. To take us into the stillness, I'm going to share a few words from Susan Jeffers from her book, Embracing Uncertainty, about facing life's ups and downs, as much of today's service is. Her words will take us into a few minutes of shared silence, which I'll end with the sound of our bell. And then we're going to hear some more music for continued reflection from George. So Again, let's do what we need to do to get comfortable, perhaps put down anything you don't need to be holding. You might find it helpful to get your feet flat on the floor, close your eyes. And the words, they're always just an offering. Feel free to use this time to meditate in your own way. So Susan Jeffers says, it is important to focus on the reality of cycles. Good follows bad, and bad follows good. Life is a series of ups and downs. It's important not to identify with the ups and downs of life. Rather, we must learn to step outside ourselves and just notice. We must not be too attached to the good. We must not be too depressed by the bad. The ups and downs are part of the flow of life. There is no use trying to change the order of the universe. It won't work. Sorry about that. You can't get rid of the downs. You can't hold on to the ups. It's better to notice both with the understanding that this too shall pass. When things are wonderful, this too shall pass. When things are difficult, this too shall pass. It helps to watch what is happening in your life and consciously notice that it is all temporary. I feel great today. This too shall pass. I feel horrible today. This too shall pass. The weather is great. This too shall pass. The weather is horrible. This too shall pass. So beginning today, imprint those words, this too shall pass, in your mind. It is an important thought. Maybe you could even write it on a little card and place it somewhere where you'll see it as a constant reminder.
I was in my early 20s and life was good. I lived with a friend and my cat Arthur in a small studio in southeast London. I was employed, and although pretty poor, I had enough and I enjoyed my life. Then one morning, I woke up to find my world was devoid of any colour. Everything was dark. There was no point to anything, and I saw no reason to get out of bed. I couldn't go outside, and my body was so heavy that even moving around was a chore. I remember staying in my bed for days on end. I cried what seemed like buckets of tears. I didn't want to see anyone, and even my cat kept away from me. My friend Doug was amazing. He did all the shopping, cooking, and tried to find ways to help me, but I wanted none of it. Sometimes it got too much for him and he had to stay away. I really didn't care. A month went by and there seemed to be no change. I didn't leave my bed and I felt completely stuck. Doug would bring me flowers, nice food, books and music. Then one day he gave me a magazine which had an article called Crochet for Beginners. It had an easy step-by-step guide and I began to teach myself to crochet. At first, I used only Blackall, but over the weeks, I started to use more colour. And somehow, the light came back into my life through this simple act of using a hook and some wool. I crocheted myself out of depression. I started to go out and I went back to work. I carried my hook and wool wherever I went. It was my security blanket. I made everyone at work a crocheted hat, whether they wanted one or not. Looking back, I see that crochet acted as a meditation for me and took me out of my self-obsession. It gave movement and it was playful. It really didn't mean anything, but it was for a while everything. Of course, I'm so full of gratitude to have had a friend who didn't give up on me. When I later thanked him, he said he could see my light and he knew I would get through. What a lesson that is. Let us look for the light in everyone. Now, when the dark clouds appear, I can say, this too shall pass. Friendship has shown me that the light does shine again.
Good morning. I made Patricia laugh a few weeks back. We were talking about New Year, things we might need to change. I said, I have two decisions to make. The first being whether or not I needed to make the second. For some reason, this was hilarious. Life-changing events sometimes need big decisions, not always welcome. I would like to tell you about a decision I had to make over 30 years ago. Let's get back to the beginning. I left school at 16 and started work as a messenger boy in the city. Through a combination of good fortune, lucky breaks, hard work, determination, and others' faith in me, I progressed from running errands to running the business pages of the Times newspaper, working directly for Rupert Murdoch. Along the way, I'd been chief investment writer at the Daily Telegraph, had been part of the team of journalists that set up and launched The Independent. I had my own slot on a Sunday afternoon TV show and was often on the TV or radio talking about business. It was a stellar career, especially for a Cockney boy who hadn't even been to university. But all the while, I knew I didn't really belong. I was waiting for the hand on my shoulder and the voice that would say, "What are you doing here? This job is not for the likes of you." Imposter syndrome. It's not irrational. I experienced it early on, the class barrier. But each time I was able to move on, walk around it, until I'd been recruited to the Times by the editor, a tough, down-to-earth Glaswegian, Charlie Wilson, known as Gorbals. Murdoch had hired him to move the paper to East London and then shake it out of the comfortable lethargy it had sunk into after bitter battles with print unions. My job was to shake up business news and bring back the advertising revenue that had been lost. We did that, Charlie and me. I was at the centre of things, riding high, just one step away from becoming the next editor. I knew I could do it because on the occasional Sunday, I did get to edit the entire paper, decide on which topics the Thunderer would pass judgment, which stories would make the headlines, and so on. Then Murdoch decided he wanted a more establishment figure, a recognised name, to carry the paper forward. Charlie was fired to make way for Simon, now Sir Simon, Jenkins. Jenkins and I argued about almost everything, and I knew that sooner or later he would want me out. Meanwhile, business editor was as far as I was allowed to go. The Sunday editing shifts were stopped. Jobs like the editor of the Times belonged to another class. Charlie had been the exception, but his job was done. It didn't need doing again. Now, I realise that thwarted ambition, compared with the hardships others have needed to endure, probably seems remarkably small beer. But it was a massive blow to my self-esteem, and I took it hard. I can recall now walking with Patricia along a dangerous cliff top on the Cherbourg Peninsula the day before I was due to return to Wapping after a family holiday. I poured it all out. Do I stay and wait to be fired? Or do I accept that my career in journalism was over? Leave or stay? On that cliff top, in tears, I knew I had to leave. I joined a small public relations company, watched it and helped it grow. And you know what? I loved it.
Thank you, David, and thanks, Pat. And I'm sure there are a lot of other untold stories in this room of tough times and how we've come out the other side of them. Perhaps we'll share those along the way. So just time for one more hymn now. The last hymn is on your hymn sheet. We're still kind of learning this, but I think we're getting there. Even though we only had it a fortnight ago, I've put it in again so that we can become familiar with the church where love lives, a real expression of our aspirations about how we take care for each other and the world. The church where love lives. we'd have this every week if it was up. I was going to say, if it was up to me, it is up to me. Just a few announcements then. Thanks to Ramona for tech hosting, Charlotte for co-hosting on Zoom. Thanks to Alex and Pat and David for their personal reflections, which mean so much. Thanks to George for our lovely music and flamboyant twiddles as ever. Thanks to Benj for supporting our singing, to Patricia for greeting, and David's about to put the kettle on for the coffee. Today we've got berry lime drizzle cake if you're in the building. What else have we got going on? Tonight is the Better World Book Club. This month it's How We Break by Vincent Deary. Too late to read that one, but if you are planning to be there and haven't yet got the link, just let me know so I can count you in. Next month we're reading a very interesting title, very timely, Monsters by Claire Dederer. It's got the subtitle, What Do We Do With Great Art by Bad People? We've got a few copies of that knocking around if you'd like to borrow one. On Friday at 7, we've got our Heart and Soul online contemplative spiritual gathering, and this week it's all about rest. Let me know if you want the link for that one. It's a great way to get to know people more deeply. For those of you that enjoyed the art play Crafternoon last week, you'll be pleased to know we're going to make that a regular thing on the third Sunday of each month, except Easter. So please put the dates in your diary if you want to be a part of that. Next Sunday we'll be back at 11 when Patricia and I will be co-leading a service on living in hope. All these activities are on the back of your order of service. You get the details in the Friday email if you're signed up for that. We've still got a few copies of the newsletter outside if you'd like to take one away. We very much have a life beyond Sunday morning, so let's do what we can to look out for each other, nurture supportive connections. So just time for our closing words and closing music. We're about to extinguish our chalice flame, but its light will shine on, burning within each and every one of us as faith and hope and love. So in the days to come, may we always be guided by the light of this inner beacon, reminding us of the community that we have known here and recalling us to our highest aspirations, our best selves. May that be so for the greater good of all. Amen.